You're watching Palatinate TV.
Hi everyone, I'm Patrick, one of the news editors at Palatinate, and these are the interviews for the 2021 SU elections. We've got Joseph here, who's running for SU president. If you'd just like to introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Joe Simmons. I'm a third-year economist, and I study at Josephine Butler College.
Fantastic. So firstly, why did you decide to run for SU president?
Durham's in crisis, and there's no doubt about that. The pandemic has devastated the student experience. The DSU is perceived as undemocratic, unrepresentative, and poor value for money. And Durham isn't really working in the interest of students. As your president of the DSU, I'll be tackling COVID-19, democratizing the DSU, and rebuilding Durham in the interest of students.
Okay, so I will kind of ask you to expand on a couple of those in a minute. But cool. Firstly, what relevant experience do you have for the role?
Well, I'm an outsider candidate, and I believe that only an outsider candidate can solve the problems facing the DSU. And an outsider candidate also understands all the problems going on in Durham at the moment, in terms of mental health, in terms of problems with courses and modules, and so on and so forth. In terms of my own personal experience, I haven't really had much involvement in the DSU, nor in college, but I do run a business. So I run a book publishing business, and the key skills that you learn from there is that you need to communicate with your customers, and that's something that the DSU really needs to get right in the next year, is knowing how to communicate with its students. And motivation. I think that we really need someone with vision this year. The problems facing Durham are huge, and we need to get them right.
So in terms of what the president's role actually involves, what do you think the most important thing that the president does is?
I think working with senior university management, I think that's key. I think that the DSU has adopted a very adversarial relationship in respect to the university, and I think that's come at the detriment to helping students. As DSU president, I will be building a very productive relationship with various members of the Senate, of university management, within the academic departments, within the Equality, Diversity and Inclusion unit, and so on and so forth.
So what would you say your manifesto and your campaign are all about?
Pardon?
So the manifestos haven't been published yet, but they will be quite soon. Yeah. What would you say your manifesto and your campaign are all about?
So three main themes: tackling COVID-19 head on, democratizing the DSU, and rebuilding Durham in the interest of students. Would you like me to talk a bit about?
Yeah.
Cool. So the headline, my manifesto is quite big, and I'll be releasing that in due course. But some of the headline policies will be working with Durham University to coordinate a campus-wide vaccination program if insufficient numbers of students are vaccinated by October 2021. The new strains of the viruses have made clear that we will be needing to get everybody vaccinated over the next year. It's estimated that 70% of people will be vaccinated by September. The remaining 30% are likely to be students and other young people. So around the time that we're returning back to campus, it will be key to get the rollout of the vaccine if insufficient numbers of people have had the vaccine. But other things include ensuring that mental health support is well-resourced and well-coordinated across the entire university, especially between college student support and the academic departments, lobbying Durham University to extend the safety net policy into the next academic year. If a certain threshold is met, so say if we miss 3 or 4 or 5 weeks of face-to-face teaching, and I'll be working to reschedule the cancelled matriculation and graduation ceremonies for later in 2022. In terms of the matriculation, I think that Easter would be the most appropriate, and for the graduation ceremonies, I believe July would be optimal or more appropriate, given that college accommodation will be free for use by students returning to Durham. to graduate. I know that the Durham University has set a date of September 2021. I think that's very optimistic. If that happens, then great. But with my manifesto, there is a plan B if that doesn't work. In terms of democratizing the DSU, I will be establishing the DSU Constitutional Convention, which will be composed of elected student representatives, and it will be tasked with redesigning the DSU's political system with the following principles in mind: a structure that reflects Durham University's collegiate system. One of the things that the DSU Democracy Review found was that people identified more with their college than with the DSU. So I think that we need a political system that reflects that. We need a robust system of checks and balances. People have felt that the elected officers are too strong and too powerful, and people are very keen to see power shared amongst the rest of the student body. We need a clear separation of powers. One of the things I noticed about the DSU Assembly was that it couldn't really function very well so long as the officers were in control of the proceedings. In the last one, I sat as an observer in the last DSU Assembly, and some of the NUS delegates were upset that they had been told that they were being told how to vote or what positions to take at the national conferences. Yet they win an election in their own right when they run for the role. But the debate appeared to almost be closed down and told that it would be discussed at another time in private. And I noticed that they were a bit upset about that. And I think that in order to have for the DSU Assembly to hold the officers to account, it's necessary to move them out and let the DSU Assembly run itself. And then finally, to top that off, we'll be seeking a fully elected DSU Assembly with its very own speaker. One of the problems with the DSU Assembly is pretty much nearly over half the members of the DSU Assembly aren't directly elected to sit in the Assembly. So the officers are elected in the capacity as to run the DSU. The faculty reps are chosen or hired by the DSU. The open positions, I believe, are also chosen. I don't believe that there is an election in that respect, but I could be wrong there. The only people who can claim democratic legitimacy within the DSU Assembly are the college reps, and I'm very keen to expand their role in the Assembly. Finally, the recommendations of the DSU Constitutional Convention will be subject to a campus-wide yes-no referendum, so that the entire student body are able to participate in that process and get the political system that they want. And finally, rebuilding Durham in the interest of students. Staple issues really, accommodation and housing. So I'll be lobbying Durham University to halt any increases in college rent and improve the quality of accommodation. I will seek to introduce a 3-tier academic support system that removes the requirement for medical evidence except in cases of serious adverse circumstances. One of the problems with the academic support system at the moment is it varies from department to department, and in some cases it requires people to start seeking mental health support from qualified individuals before they receive any kind of academic support. And I find it nonsensical. I think it's a very poor way to do things, because it means that people have basically hit their breaking point or are at their breaking point, and before they even receive any kind of support from the department. So that's something I'm very keen to do. I'll be promoting social inclusion by addressing the issues facing international students and minority groups at Durham University. I've spoken to a number of international students. One of the things that we're going to do is we're going to seek to introduce a DSU international rep who will be a sabbatical officer who will stand aside the 5 other officers. This will be important as Durham University seeks to become a far more international university. I believe that the number of international, or the share of international students that they're seeking, is something like 37% by 2027. So it's quite clear that we need to prioritize the interests of international students in order to succeed. In terms of minority groups, we can help local students by allocating more parking permits. We can help working class students by increasing the value of the Durham grant. We can help transgender students by making it easier to change their names on the IT systems. And I'll also be reviewing the recommendations of the Culture Commission when it issues its report at the end of the year. I will be rebuilding the relationship between the DSU and the student press by working to restore part funding for the printed edition of the Palatinate. I will also be seeking to find a new home for Purple Radio. I understand that their situation at the moment requires the moving to a different location. Ideally, that would be the Palatine Centre. I will also be working with the Bubble to ensure that they get to secure new sponsors, work with find funding from alumnus, and also work on their advertising. Finally, I'll be tackling bullying, harassment, and discrimination by promoting Durham University's report and support tool and working with the Durham Constabulary to stamp out sexual harassment, racial harassment across Durham, on the streets across the city of Durham.
So you mentioned the Culture Commission. What are your thoughts on the Culture Commission, and what would you like to do with it going forward?
Well, it's been quite difficult to get in touch with people who have been running the Culture Commission. In my experience, I've tried to find a way to find out what it's all really about. The people I have spoken to have said that it represents a first step towards resolving bad behaviour in Durham, and I'm totally behind that. But one of the I guess I feel a bit disappointed because it's moving at a very slow pace, and I think that the DSU can take more action in stamping out bad behaviour in Durham. One of the the DSU doesn't even feature Durham University's main reporting tool, which is called Report and Support, on its website. I haven't seen that promoted on its Facebook page either. And the intensity and scale of abuse and harassment taking place on the streets of Durham demands a police response. The podcast by Purple Radio called Being a Black Student at Durham University revealed the appalling scale of racial abuse taking place in the city of Durham. And this is consistent with the experiences of international students, particularly students coming from Asia. I would have liked to have seen more on that front. I would have liked to have seen more on that front, and I'm disappointed that there hasn't been more, that there doesn't seem to be evidence of a wider strategy. But I'm behind the principle of the Culture Commission, and I'm very interested to see what recommendations they make, and I'll be reviewing them and implementing the workable solutions that come up with.
More broadly then, what would you aim to do differently to your predecessor?
I would focus on a much broader range of issues. I think that the current strategy is being very narrow, focusing almost solely on, or how it appears to be solely on the Culture Commission. So I would be taking an active role in tackling the issues with COVID-19. I would take an active role in democratizing the DSU, and I would take an active role in rebuilding Durham in the interest of students. I think that those areas require quite major, a large amount of leadership to get those issues right and to get those policies into action.
What do you think about the recently published democracy review?
I think it tells the DSU what everyone has been saying for the past couple of years, that it is undemocratic, unrepresentative, and the DSU is also poor value for money. people are very keen to make the DSU more democratic. I've spoken to a large number of people, and even people who don't like the DSU are very, very keen to make sure that the DSU is running a lot better. They don't want to burn it down. They want to make it much better for students. Some of the most interesting statistics coming out from the democracy review was that only 17% of people of respondents felt represented by the DSU. Only 26% of people feel there's room for debate at the DSU. Only 30% of people feel that the DSU talks about issues relevant to students, and only 30% of people felt that they knew how to get involved if they wanted to in the DSU. So these are quite major issues. I think that the DSU is facing a real existential crisis at the minute. I think that this is really make or break for the DSU. The DSU has to get it right in the next year. Otherwise, people will just lose faith completely. On top of that, there's also, every year the DSU is told quite clearly by the student body that it's not representing its academic interests either in the National Student Survey. And that's consistent year after year. It's why I think that an outsider candidate is necessary in order to push through those changes, because I don't think that people at the DSU are quite getting it. And I'm very, very keen to work on that and to resolve it and get it, just get it over and done with for good, because there's so many issues at Durham that demand much more attention than the DSU currently.
You mentioned the stat which I was going to pick up on, which is only a quarter of respondents think there's room for debate and discourse in Durham SU. What would you like to do to change that?
First of all, I think we need to promote a political culture that is inclusive of all people on the political spectrum. I think that some people, particularly in the centre and on the right, feel that they're not able to participate in the DSU. And even then, people on the left feel that they can't participate in the DSU. It's quite interesting to see how unified the opposition is to the DSU. It cuts across political affiliations. I think what's needed is that we need to establish a constitutional structure that allows for broad representation. So I'm very keen to see colleges represented in the DSU, because colleges are very varied, and people in college have very varied and diverse political opinions. What I'm seeking to do is have a college representative for each year. So it would be 4 times 17. So you almost end up with, goodness knows, over 70 representatives. And by increasing the number of representatives, what that should hopefully do is allow for a wider number of people, a much wider group of people to get involved at the DSU. Yeah, but I think that fostering a political culture is very, very important. I contacted all the political societies to see if they were interested, and I did receive quite interesting responses. They're very keen to debate with one another. That's what I found. So people are very keen to have these debates and have these discussions, and it's something that I'm absolutely behind supporting.
And just finally on the democracy review, the second thing I wanted to pick up on was that under half of students felt that students from all backgrounds are welcome within the DSU. Is there anything you'd like to add on that?
Yeah, are you able to tell me a bit more about that? Because I was reading it, but I did see that statistic. What sort of background is it referring to? Is it social, or is it ethnicity, or?
Well, as I understand it, that's how the question was worded. Right. So the stat's not entirely clear.
Okay. Yeah, I guess that is a bit tricky actually, because what background, because there's so many ways that you could categorize a person. Maybe social background, maybe political background, maybe ethnic. I don't know. I think that the best way to go about this is by focusing on people's views. So I think that we should be promoting a diversity of opinion within the DSU. I believe that there is a role for representing minority views in the DSU. Yeah, I think there is a role. There is a role there, and I think that it already does that. What I want to do is I want to get the views of the rest of Durham into the DSU so that everybody feels represented.
And just following on from that, it's quite clear that there are a number of students who are either just apathetic to the SU or genuinely quite opposed to it.
Yeah.
Do you think that the SU should try to appeal to all students, and how?
Absolutely. That's it's a students' union. It should, it's for students. It's not for students of a certain view or a certain background. It should be a student union for everyone. I'm running a non-partisan campaign, and I'll be a non-partisan candidate. I don't believe it's right that I should use the DSU as a forum to express my own personal political views. I think we should be reaching out to everyone, and that's exactly how I run my campaign. So I've gotten in touch with sport teams, I've gotten in touch with welfare teams, I've gotten in touch with international students, I've gotten in touch with members of minority groups, leading members of minority groups, and this is only going to increase. So I'm going to get in touch with much more people in the future, and the response has been phenomenal. They are very, very, very keen to get involved with the DSU. But it's about having someone with the vision and the know-how to include these groups and include everyone in the DSU. I think that the role for the DSU is focusing on the real issues affecting students. I think that should be the role it plays. I think that the DSU needs to cut down on the amount of bureaucracy facing the student societies. I understand that student societies face quite significant obstacles in first of all getting started and running as well. I feel that people feel well. People have expressed to me that that the DSU that there's almost an atmosphere of mistrust between the DSU and the society and the student societies, and that's something that I'm very keen to resolve. So when my manifesto comes out, my full manifesto comes out in a couple of days, we'll definitely see how I plan to include everyone by representing the interests of people on sport teams, in welfare teams, in student journalism, in student societies, student enterprise as well. Entrepreneurs are really important in Durham, and they should be represented too. So yeah, I've got a robust and very, very exciting program that is absolutely committed to including everybody in the Durham student body at the DSU.
So my final question is, the Democracy Review indicated as well that there's a lot of apathy, not just among people who, as a result of the last year's election, which was quite controversial, but also among first years who were not around for that. How would you aim to involve first years to make sure that they feel involved as well?
I think Freshers Week was really important, and I know that a lot of freshers really enjoyed Freshers Week. I think that was a really good thing that the DSU did this year. So I am really grateful that went ahead and that they had a good time. But you're absolutely right, is that first years don't really have much of an experience with the DSU, and I think that next year will be key in getting them back involved. So we will be needing to support the student societies in particular. I know that there will be perhaps an absence of student leadership within those groups. So the DSU should be providing leadership, providing education and training for people to get these societies up and running again. yeah, but I don't know. I don't think that the interests of freshers are necessarily that much different from the rest of the student body. I'll be rescheduling their cancelled matriculation event for later in 2022. So I think there's a lot for freshers to be excited about next year with the DSU.
And finally, do you have any final things you'd like to add or anything?
Whoa. Yeah, I'll talk a bit about mental health. I think that mental health is really important, and I feel that there hasn't necessarily been much talk about mental health by senior university management. It's incredibly important that you get in touch with somebody if you're struggling, if you're alone. You don't have to suffer this COVID-19 alone. You can acquire support from your academic departments. You can acquire support from the college student support. You can acquire support from welfare teams, and welfare teams are very, very keen to get in touch with you. That I've spoken to a number of them, and one of the things that they noted was that they weren't getting the traction that they would if they held their events in person. So they're very, very keen to get in touch with you if you're struggling. So please get in touch if you're struggling at the moment.
Thank you very much, Joe.
No worries.